There we go. How remakes affect the rest of your practice, what it indicates about your practice generally, how sales methods actually affect your remakes quite a bit. We're going to go over the common remakes and types, particularly for account remakes, and focusing on where to train, where you can kind of fix some things and address them. So expectations and impact, it's going directly to your profit anytime you've got a remake. Anytime someone refunds, anytime it's impacting your reputation, can have an impact on your morale. But if you've got to refund $1, if you've got to spend more on the back end to get another set of lenses in, or do a frame change, etc., even just partial refunds can affect things quite a bit. And usually when I see a really high remake percentage, it's indicative that there are a lot of other things going on in the practice that need to be addressed. And this is oftentimes a symptom of all of that. And also it's pretty rare that, we walk into a really well-run practice and they have a super high remake percentage. Usually they're able to kind of keep those things down and stay ahead of them. And also, if you're really proud of your 0% remake percentage, you definitely have things to address. That usually means you're not uncovering needs, you're not addressing things that dispense correctly, or you're not tracking or inspecting work. Those are common things we see. So of course, you got to track. Make sure you're tracking from the individual employees. Make sure you're tracking for the practice overall. Look at account remakes and lab remakes. You're also evaluating your vendors. Lab remakes, anything caused by the lab. They messed up, they sent you something wrong, RX was off. It can be attributed to your source. That should not be in high percentages at all. You might have some variance in a week. You might have some variance because you don't have high volume. But if you're looking at things in aggregate, those should be single digits, low single digits. Account remakes, these are the ones you can attribute either to your practice directly, to the patient, to something that happened in the exam room. This is something that you can't necessarily attribute to the lab. This is hanging at about 8% for the group overall. We see a 4 to 5 to 1 versus lab remakes pretty commonly. And we see kind of 3 different groups in terms of percentages. And this is for combined lab and account remakes. The single digit club, this is roughly most people, kind of close to 50%. They are all under the 10% rate, and a good portion, most of them, it's kind of centered around that 5% remake mark. And that's really an excellent goal, is if you can hang around 5%, you're doing very, very well. Double digits, when you've exceeded 10%, you're not quite in really high territory, but there's usually 1 or 2 particular issues that you need to address to get yourself under 10%. And if you're exceeding 15%, you're doing it month over month. Sometimes I've seen as high as 25, 30% with high volume. When you're doing that, you're just burning dollar bills, and you're probably noticing it. It's definitely affecting your profit. There's no question about it. And it may be related to a lot of other issues that are popping up in the practice. So as far as tracking, again, make sure you're tracking overall and by the individual. This includes employed ODs if you've got them. That really helps with things like RXs, stuff like that, evaluating that effect. Also with setting expectations. Track in-house, pull out the spreadsheet. If you've got Crystal PM, et cetera, run your numbers, compile reports. Or, we have our reports from our lab. If you've got other vendors, they likely have some data that you can use to track this stuff individually. And if you have time, of course, follow the 80-20% rule, try to get your best return. But eventually and over time, you need to get as granular as you can so that you can attribute remakes to specific causes, progressives versus single vision, tracking it by particular materials, particular coats, particular labs, particular individuals can really help you get closer and closer to that 5% mark, for example. Weekly numbers useful, but they're super variable. So you might have an incredibly high week individually, or as a practice, try not to get too down unless you're seeing a string of them, and that'll show up in the monthly numbers, which are going to be much more useful. And if you've got a lab or a source where you're only pulling 5 jobs a month from it, it's going to take you a while to compile enough data to evaluate that source, of course. How do you kind of incentivize staff? How do you track that stuff individually? How do you hold yourself to a standard? Make sure individually employees are holding themselves to one, track them individually and as a practice. So it's great to have it up on a board or during a meeting going over, this is what we hit as a practice, this is what you hit individually, and kind of track from there. Once you achieve something, maybe you go from 15% to 10%, you need to move the stakes until you get to the bare minimum of remake percentage. Don't get content. And that holds individually and as a practice. Incentives, whether you're offering people some sort of bounty for hitting a certain percentage or exceeding the standard. It can also work if you're just tracking individual improvement. Maybe that one individual is at 25%. You should be happy that they hit 15% over the course of a month, and they can be rewarded for that. And that can definitely help with compliance, help with a desire to grab knowledge about how they can improve their remake percentage individually. And commissions, if you're paying them, need to be affected by the remake percentage. If every other sale is getting remade several times and you're having to pay for these remakes, you're having increased refunds, you're having cancellations, that should definitely play into any sort of payouts. That may not make me super popular, but it's certainly something you should think about from a practice management standpoint. And again, the weekly numbers can be useful, but you want to give some time to grab some useful data. So maybe every 2 weeks, or maybe just use the monthly numbers if you're going to set up an incentive program and when you're tracking standards, particularly individually. Really quick, a big thing that I've noticed is a lot of practices just take the work, take the lab, and trust it and run with it. Sure, we've got PLN. You know, if you don't want to look at the work, that's your right, but I really encourage you to inspect your work upon arrival if you're not doing so. Impossible to tell if a root cause is happening because you're not inspecting it if you're not inspecting it. And definitely get that done before you contact the patient. There's no reason for a patient to walk in and then discover that the lenses haven't been looked at yet. And really try to hold yourself as accountable as possible. Sure, there's self-preservation. We all want to feel good about ourselves, but you really need to be humble and stay humble and accept that we're all going to make human mistakes. Even the experts among us do it constantly. And be very familiar with the product you're dispensing. Is it a 4-drop? Is it a 2-drop? Should I verify this at near? Should I verify it for full reading power? Especially when you're ordering a few kind of off-kilter lifestyle lenses. Make sure you know the technical limitations there, know the tolerances for things like a bifocal, stuff like that before you hit inspection. Make sure those markings don't, again, this is about, you know, trust from the lab. Everyone will endeavor to be accurate in a lab, but things happen, speed is a thing. So make sure you take a quick look at least and make sure that those markings are accurate. Certainly before you stick them on an auto lensometer, they're not always going to catch it. Depending on the model you've got, calibration, etc. You don't want to trust the machinery. Don't test the workmanship if you don't have to. And keep that ANSI summary handy. No reason to have the full report just for your daily inspection. Of course, look into it from a training perspective, but your summary should be right there by any sort of lensometry or inspection station you've got. And a brief checklist. Look for obvious scratches or defects, anything you can see with the bare human eye. Just give it a quick once over. Make sure you're doing feature and material check. Does it have transitions? Does it have AR? No reason to go inspect power if you order transitions and they're not on there. Make sure you're checking for decentration, PD, segs. Make sure that the lens is oriented the way you ordered it. Make sure you do the RX check and then head into standard adjustment, making sure the frame is adjusted either in standard or as the patient desires the frame to be pre-adjusted as much as you can. So common remakes, we'll get into common account remakes here, kind of causes, and then we'll get into some ways to reduce them. Ordering or entry error, big thing just comes from, you know, paying attention, having focus, and really more than anything, taking time and double checking yourself because you're going to make mistakes. Read it backwards, reference your original documentation. If you're having to re-enter into an order system. Do a mental check. If you're the person that sold them, more than likely, you need to try to remember a couple details about that sale as you're entering it. Check during the sales process that you're not skipping over people, not asking the right questions. Make sure that they're not giving you a call a day or a couple days later or an hour later after you've entered it and wanting to add a feature or add a coating. Make sure you understand the product that you're dispensing. If you need a call with us or you need to schedule a call with a source, make sure that you're not ordering the wrong corridor links. You're ordering the exact progressive you want. You're not going to be any sort of surprises in terms of the product. And a good thing to do in general is, yes, I know it's happened to me plenty of times. That person walked in 30 minutes before cutoff, you made the sale and you really want to get it to the lab before tomorrow. You want to resist that instinct. Have an established cutoff time. Make sure you're not rushing the entry. And if you know every day we submit by this time, it's comforting, it's routine, and it should help reduce these little things. Chain of custody is a big thing we'll get into later. This happens when the person who is ordering the product is not the person who sold it. So they don't have any memory of this sale. They don't understand the dialogue that happened. Maybe a detail was left off that someone would have remembered while entering the order. That happens more often, that we have higher remake percentages when chain of custody is different. Edger errors. Maybe you don't edge, but it's certainly a very common remake reason. And it's usually after the lens has been cut, there's a shape problem or an axis problem. Something happened during blocking up or slippage. A big thing too is cutout. So make sure you're entering accurate boxing data. I don't care what they printed on the frame. Don't trust it. Pull out a PD stick, or if you're doing remote trace it every time. But don't trust those A measurements, B measurements, DBLs, anything. It will take you an extra few seconds to measure, but you will notice a reduction in cutout issues. Also will affect your thickness, so be mindful of that. And make very sure you're selecting the right bevel type. Many accounts don't understand that just selecting metal versus xyl versus a drill versus a groove will dramatically affect the minimum and maximum thicknesses on a lens. And while you're going through and entering work, make sure you're blocking things up right according to the lens type, whether it's a progressive, a bifocal, single vision. Make sure you're selecting the right material. You don't want all that poly building up because you selected the wrong cycle. Make sure your bevel type's correct. Make sure your AR setting's right. Is the chuck pressure correct? Am I putting it on the gentle cycle? And make sure you use the right pads. Maybe you had a friend or the installer told you to use a particular brand. I've seen within brands, within models, for whatever reason, from one practice to another, a different brand might work better. And make sure you're not using basic pads or basic hydro pads. You need an ultra hydro and oleophobic pad for modern coatings. If it's a basic hard coat or basic AR, you can get away with a cheaper pad. But at this point, we see 80% of premium AR running through. So, and then last up, non-adapts in general, RX changes in general, they tend to be related in terms of source reasons why we see a jump in this type of remake. So RX change, this is where tracking by OD can be useful. If you're having a communication issue or maybe you need some sort of documentation or other change, and by staff. So if somebody is constantly attributing an RX change issue, it may need to retrain on that particular issue. Material non-adapts don't really happen all that often. So if you're seeing a ton that it's happening every single week that you've got a material non-adapt, more than likely we need to troubleshoot for a different reason. Progressive non-adapts, usually it's not down to whether the design is good or bad or whether it was ground faithfully. It's usually caused by something that happened during fit, during the sale. Maybe we had something in terms of entry, or maybe we just had a bad day in terms of measurements. But another common thing is look at that old pair. That one gets missed quite a bit. where they've never seen the old pair, didn't ask for it, and they find out it's a totally different type of progressive. And big thing is not to let people walk out unsatisfied and not to remake for these reasons when they're not the true source. If this is a high source of remakes for you, there's a good chance that it's something else about the troubleshooting or sales or fit process that's causing it. And if you can get to the root cause of the issue, you'll have a much happier patient. They won't want to go anywhere else. And chances are, if they walk into another practice, they may experience the same issue if it really is attributable to that type of problem. So how do we address these, and where do these things pop up? First up would be during the sales method. And one of the primary drivers is having a prescriptive versus a consultative method. If you're 100% telling everybody in the practice who walks in and wants glasses, this is your pair, this is what you're going to buy from me today, it is this amount of dollars, versus discussing with them what they'd like, helping in the selection process. What do you like about the old pair? What do you not like? What do you expect from this pair? Where will you be wearing? And going over benefits and feature sets. The consultative method is going to prevent you from having a lot of remakes just from general dissatisfaction, evaluation of that habitual pair, and general kind of compatibility issues with their expectations. Related to that, make sure you're going over your policies. Not necessarily that a good or a bad policy or any policy would affect your remake percentage directly, but what it can do is set the tone on things like delivery time and prevent people from being upset before they even walk into the practice and already looking for a problem. I know those remakes happen. They walk in, they're not in the right mindset, and they want to refund them before they've even touched them because something about their expectations weren't met maybe a week or weeks earlier. And be very honest about your capability. If you know something can't be tinted, if you know something won't cut out right, if you know it won't look good, but they keep insisting, be very honest about that capability. Be okay with saying no and directing them to another choice that will work. It is much, much, much better to disappoint that day and funnel them into something that will work than to wait a week or two and have things fester and go through multiple remakes. Effect of when this isn't really tackled, you've got false reports of issues visually, kind of related to that policies talk. Entry error remakes, we addressed this a little bit earlier, where they call back because you didn't go over the consultative process. Or habitual pair incompatibility. We didn't evaluate the old pair. We didn't know what worked or didn't work about the old pair. Patient reports the old pair works better. If we had evaluated it beforehand, we would have addressed that during the sales process and wouldn't have even entered it. And then fit. Commonly, these are just kind of mechanical things that pop up during your process. So something about the way that you're fitting the glasses is causing a remake. So fitting heights, PDs not consistently being measured in a certain way. Maybe we need a retrain, maybe we need a knowledge update, maybe staff who aren't qualified are making a sale too often, or maybe just expectations about the type of lens they're ordering or type of product that they're ordering wasn't directly addressed right. Even just getting the frames pre-adjusted to match or pre-adjusted to what the patient expects out of the fit and feel of the pair. And a lot of this just comes down to, if you're seeing it, we need to get our most experienced staff to retrain and address it directly if we've seen drift with experienced staff. And if you've got a whole lot of reasons that pop up are really consistent, you know, my peripheral vision, the way a corridor works, first time progressive wearers, make sure you have those common non-adapt reasons and you're going over them while you're making the sale, while you're doing the fit, so that expectations are set and they're not unrealistic about how vision's going to be. A chain of custody went into this briefly earlier, but if the person who sold the pair is the person who enters the pair, remake percentages, that's where they're going to be absolutely lowest. We definitely see an increase in remake percentages when somebody who is doing the ordering is not the person who sold the glasses. This is also very important in terms of edging. If your staff can do that basic single vision pair or standard progressive on the edger, it can help you a whole lot with your promise times being accurate. They're not going to promise something because they know when they can deliver it themselves, and certainly helps with ordering the uncuts a lot more accurately. You know you're the one responsible for that. You're going to take extra care to make sure that it cuts out correctly. And much easier on the tracking side to point to a particular individual or process or person for focus on retraining, if that's showing up with a particular person, particular machinery, etc. Scratches. So for whatever reason, you start seeing a bump in scratches, or it's always been a problem. A lot of the times it's related to something about a process or the mechanics of the equipment in your office. So common things to look for. And these cause a ton of remakes when they're not addressed. So look them over when they show up. No reason to even begin the inspection process if there's a huge gouge or scratch on the lens to start with. And it's much easier to track who's attributable for that issue. If you know the lens came in pristine, but it's not after edging or dispense, you know you need to track it internally. What are you cleaning with? I see it all the time. We're using paper products. We're cleaning them dry. These are things we tell patients all day long not to do, but we do it ourselves in the lab as if our touch and our desire is somehow going to change how those lenses will react. So make sure you're being honest with yourself. Get some microfiber, don't clean them dry, and be consistent. And if you can, be, again, down to specificity when you can. Track it by vendor, track it by AR type. If you find a particular brand's causing you a problem, you'll need to address it, of course. And then calibration of machines. Make sure you're sighting in a manual lensometer pretty frequently. It's not too hard to set that thing up every day once you get the experience. Read your manual and check and see when they recommend calibrating things. I've certainly seen that happen before. And I didn't quite get into it as well, but on the mechanical side, I've more than one practice has had multiple scratch remakes down to the lens stop being dirty, or maybe the little wax or the pad hasn't been replaced in a year or two. Just simple things like that can have a surprising effect if you notice a spike. At the dispensing level, this is the hardest thing to solve because at this point, something's wrong, tensions are high, and you really need to know what you're doing to fix a problem on the fly like that. But typically, nothing about the dispensing process should be causing a remake. Nothing about the dispensing process should be making the problem worse. It's because something happened earlier. A lot of people go into remakes thinking, oh, Zeke's just going to tell me how to troubleshoot progressives, and that should reduce my remakes. It's really down to everything we discussed before this point contributing to that problem at dispense. Was it inspected? Did I order it right? Was I honest with them at the sales process? Did I ask enough questions? Did I take my time? Did I worry about chain of custody? If all those are addressed, you shouldn't have as many of these remakes popping up at the dispense point. But usually at this point, if I have someone reach out and they're having an issue that happened at dispense, it's because of progressives. So getting your knowledge base up on troubleshooting progressives is going to help. Usually it's down to a corridor length and a compatibility with that habitual pair. And again, I've said this before, but stay humble, be okay being wrong. We're all humans, we all make mistakes. And usually if you take the mindset of, okay, it's probably not an issue with anything else that happened mechanically, you know, the RX or the progressives or the material light shows. More than likely something happened where we didn't ask the right question. I had a bad day in terms of fit, made an honest mistake, or just the realities of the human I'm dealing with. They might not be in the right mindset. And that relates to being realistic about buyer's remorse. So if you had that issue, if you know you're having, really it's a mental issue affecting, it's a mindset issue affecting your remake percentage at that point. Just be straightforward with it. Of course, not confrontational, but you need to get to the root of the problem. You know, if it's really, hey, are we really just maybe regretting the purchase? You know, is there something about the pair of glasses that we wanted to address directly? There's no reason to kick the can down the road, cause further damage to their perception of you and your practice, and of course, causing damage to your profit if you don't address the problem directly. Troubleshooting notes on progressives in general, just very quickly going over it. Usually when I have someone shoot me a question about progressives, I send them through this thought process, and usually there are 2 or 3 things missing from it. So even just this checklist, writing it down can help you. Biggest thing you can do is check similarities with habituals. First-time wearers are different, of course, but specifically tilt wrap, freeform, vertex. Check between the comparisons of the corridor. See if you could find out what that old design was. Was it a short fit? Was it conventional? Was there something about the design philosophy that was completely different? In the rare case that you have a material problem, make sure those are the same. If not, evaluate why that might affect vision. And was there an inspection error that happened? You know, we didn't catch that this PD was off, this seg was off, decentration was on. There's induced prism that I didn't catch at the inspection stage. And keep asking questions, have them present the issue and explain the issue several ways so you can get as much detail if you need to take that next step and reach out to somebody else about it. And emotions might be high. If you feel like there's more to resolve and you haven't evaluated the problem and you need to talk with someone else, just go ahead and schedule a follow-up. Troubleshooting follow-up. You're going to talk to your favorite lab person. You're going to talk to another professional you know, and get another professional opinion and get back to that patient at a time that works for both of you. Generally, remake notes about this entire process. Consistency is massive. Make sure you're doing all of these steps as often as possible, every time if possible. You're always doing the same sales process. You're always inspecting. You're always following your checklists. When you have lapses, gosh, that just tends to be the one time that something broke down. Just luck of the draw, it's going to happen to you. And tracking is super important. If you're not looking at the numbers and you're going by feeling, dollars are probably leaking out somewhere. Satisfaction is leaking out somewhere. If you can't track it, you can't see it whatsoever. And then again, back to my previous point, most of these issues are addressed way before you ever hand the patient a pair of glasses. So while you want to, bone up on your troubleshooting as far as progressives, et cetera, it's usually caused far and away, way before the patient entered your practice. And that's it for this round. So if you have further questions about it, never be bashful. Support at Tri-Pivotal. It'll get shot off to myself or someone like me who can answer your questions about this topic or anything else. And I think we'll pass it back off to Ian to hit the Q&A.
Great. Thanks, Zeke. I really appreciate it. And with that said, as Zeke mentioned, if anyone has any questions, feel free to pop them into Zoom's chat feature. You can find that typically towards the bottom of your screen. There's a little speech bubble that says chat, and input your question. I'll make sure to relay it to Zeke, and we'll get you a live answer pertaining to all of the material today. If we don't get any questions today within the next probably 15, 20 seconds, we will just go ahead and wrap up and end up seeing you next time. But for right now, we don't have any questions in the chat, and we'll just hang out for a little bit to see if anything pops in here. Nobody wants to speak up first. There we go. Contractor Family says, how do you handle buyer's remorse? Do you recommend charging a restocking fee?
As far as the restocking fee, if you've already agreed to a refund, you're not going to win that battle. If they're leaving and they're really genuinely upset, you're not going to see that person again. So sure, you can grab that grudge money, I guess, but it won't probably make a difference on whether your practice is successful in the long run. And if they're on good terms, you at least got a chance of maintaining your reputation and possibly seeing them back again. I can personally say It's happened before with me where, I don't give a lot of remakes just because I usually set policies pretty realistically and try to give expectations. But when I feel like it's warranted, I'll give that refund. And I've definitely seen more than one person pop back into the practice after doing so. So the restocking fee, not so much. But a lot of refunds can be tackled with policy by being very upfront about your expectations as far as refunds. You're going to have to set them. But if you are very open about when they qualify, the fact that it's custom, timelines, delivery timelines, and signature, and making that upfront and vocal during the sales process doesn't have to take a lot of time. Here's our policies, brief overview. We expect delivery in X amount of days. If there are issues, I'll reach out to you. This is custom product, so we do not typically give refunds for it. I'd like you to sign and acknowledge here. Let me know if you've got any questions. It doesn't take a whole lot of time to get into, but you're doing that. You've got physical verification of it. And the mere act of that keeps the buyer's remorse down significantly. I've certainly had a handful of people where I felt like maybe they were that type of person who was just kind of shopping and was okay letting $500 hang out for a week. And it keeps that person from running the card. So I kind of few paths there. That's mostly how I address it.
One thing that they added to that question while you were answering is to clarify, patient is not happy with style of frame.
Okay.
It just restructures your answer at all.
Right. I mean, somewhat. You've already made the lenses, so that one's tough. You didn't do anything wrong, unless for some reason you did a really poor fit that didn't pay attention, didn't look at the habitual or something where you really feel that it's your own fault. But again, addressing that with the policy, we don't do frame style, changes for free. Being accommodating with that policy is usually a pretty good thing to do in terms of, hey, we'll remake you. If you want to switch to another frame, we can do equal or lesser value. But at the end of the day, if you're at that point, the percentage should be very low when you reach that point. If it's high, it's probably something that's happening again earlier in the process. Is someone being pressured into a frame that they don't like, or of a dollar amount that they don't like for sales purposes? Were we not great about asking questions or evaluating the old pair? When it's happening individually, even within a practice, it can sometimes be attributed to that.
Excellent. Thank you. For now, that's the only set of questions we've had in the chat. I would say, rather than us sharing another 15 to 20 seconds of awkward silence together, if anyone has any follow-up questions, feel free to send them to support@tripivotal.com. We'll go ahead and wrap this one up. Thank you, Zeke, as always, for your insights for the members. And if you all need us, you all know where to find us. Otherwise, we will see you with a new webinar next month.